Trackside tales, insider advice, lessons from the paddock. Find it all here on the Sector 1 Motorsport podcast in partnership with Formula Careers. Hello and welcome to the Sector 1 Motorsport podcast in partnership with Formula Careers. On today's episode, I am joined by a man who helps to make your experience of a race weekend just that bit better. He's just wrapped up his time as the event experience manager at Formula E. Please welcome Peter Moxon. Peter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sid.
Now, I know I've given you a slight introduction there, but I want to hear it in your words. Who are you?
Who am I? But that's a tough question. So I am effectively the person who tries to make sure you have a good time when you go to an event. So that's, that can be as obvious as, you getting great access to fans, other fans, drivers, teams, experiences. It can be as obvious as that. It can also be making sure that you can go to the toilet when you need to. It can be making sure that you get into the venue easily. It can be anything between those two extremes. I think there's a bit of an overlooked aspect to creating events where people turn up and, you obviously, if you're going to, let's say you're going to F1, you're going to Silverstone, you're there for the racing, you're there to watch the cars go around the track, you're there to watch, wheel-to-wheel action. But actually, there's a lot that goes on behind that can basically make or break your day. If you can't get access to the basic things, if you don't have a good experience away from the track, your experience of what's happening on track is going to be affected. And that's where I come in. That's where we come in. We are effectively the branch between the drivers and the fans. We want to make sure you can get as close as possible, while also staying safe, as a family as well.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning then. When did your interest in motorsport begin? Where did that come from?
So I think it's probably a bit of a stereotypical answer. I think you ask anyone who's my age, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you ask anyone of my era how they get into motorsport, and generally it's through their parents, right? It's through Sunday morning, you go down, dad's got F1 on, you've got Coulthard and Schumacher and Hakkinen. That probably gives away my age a little bit. They're all on track, they're having a great time, and that's kind of where the exposure came in. It's through that familiar exposure. It's your dad watching it, it's spending time with your parents and kind of bonding over sport. I think most sport is like that. I think you find you generally will become a fan of the sport at a young age, and you become a lifetime fan. It's really hard for sports to get fans to come in later in life. So for me, it's very much a case of, fond memories of watching Schumacher dominate. Our poor, David Coulthard, who never won anything really, but he tried. And when he did win, it made it even better. So that's kind of where the interest in motorsport came in. Obviously, remember Lewis winning in 2008. That was one of my, that's like a core memory. Because obviously the time difference in Brazil, the time of the race, the fact it was a Sunday evening, how kind of disappointed we'd been in that, the season before with Raikkonen winning. And I think that's when I then realised that actually, this isn't just Schumacher, this isn't just one team, one driver driving around the track and winning every weekend. There's actually some real drama here. And for me, it was never, I wasn't sat there at 15 years old going, I need to become I need to be this to do with events. It was more a fact of, I knew where I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be in motorsport and sport in general. I knew that I wanted to have an impact that way, but how that looked, that's something that came later.
I was going to say, so when you started thinking about what you were going to do with your life, where you kind of saw the work things going, did you always know it was motorsport? It was going to be in that industry?
Weirdly, no. So I knew it was going to always be something to do with speed and adrenaline and kind of something fast paced. I'm not designed mentally to deal and sit in an office and just do nothing for my entire life. That's not the way that my brain is wired. I accept that's part of the job. That's always going to be part of the job. But where I really come alive is actually when you're actively doing something physical and you're building something and you're creating something. So for me, actually, I'm a pad brat. I'm a forces kid. I grew up on Army and Air Force bases. So that actually was where I was, it was like, yeah, I love motorsport, it's great, but I'm actually going to go in the forces, and and that's where I'm going to be for the next 15 years. What actually ended up happening was that there was a massive budget cut about 10 years ago in UK Armed Forces. All the places that I was interested in, all the jobs that I was interested in, kind of disappeared. So it was a case of, right, what do I want to do? At the time, I was playing rugby to a pretty high level, so I thought, I'm going to go just do a sports science degree. I'll figure it out while I'm there. No real, and I think it's important, it's important to say, no real idea about exactly what I wanted to do. I just kind of was like, I like sport, I like this. It's something I can get into, so let's go about that way. Did that degree, did okay, got a 2-1, didn't spend as much time studying as I should have, spent more time playing rugby and partying, but that's kind of a core part of the uni experience, especially in North Wales. There's nothing else to do. And then, decided that I was going to do a master's in sports business management. The most important part of that being that it had to be a master's degree that had some level of interaction with the industry. I think that was for me, that was really important, because I had to know that I was getting involved with the industry, even if it was just to a small extent. Actually, when I was doing that, part of the project or part of the course was a workplace learning, where effectively it's like an internship, but it's an unpaid internship, but very much kind of you do your thesis while working with a sports team. And the uni, they were great, but they had at the time a limited selection of stuff that was on offer. They had like boxing gyms and local football clubs and that kind of thing, and none of that really interested me. So I just, throughout my time doing my masters, I'd noticed there was no real literature, or there was no real volume to motorsport in academia. There was nothing. It was like 4 studies that had been done forever around motorsport fans. So I just kind of thought, stuff for this, I'm going to do my thesis on that, and if an F1 or a WEC or someone like that comes about, then brilliant. And luckily enough, Matt Roberts, who was the business intelligence director at F1 at the time, and actually saw one of my emails to him, responded and effectively said, look, we had an agreement that there was no money involved, there was no I wasn't going to get anything from it really, apart from F1's name attached to my thesis, but I'd have the opportunity to go into their offices, present to them, and if there was any great ideas, they'd implement them. I've worked, as opposed to the undergrad where I didn't work very hard, worked really hard on the postgrad, did incredibly well, did better than I ever expected in that. And just so happened, luckily, that around the time that I was presenting my thesis to them, one of their junior analysts had just handed his notice in. So there was actually a pretty good timing there. Still had to wait 6 months for him to leave, so I did another job while I was waiting, and then went into F1 basically straight out of a master's degree. Kind of got thrown straight in the deep end, and then 6 weeks after starting at F1, COVID hit. So it kind of was like you've got your dream, you're not maybe not your dream job, but you're in your dream company, but you can't go in the office, you can't go to races, and actually we're going to put you on furlough. So it was a very weird situation where I'd been at F1 for 6 weeks and then had 6 months effectively on furlough.
Yeah.
So I'd done, yes, it was on the CV, but there was no real benefit to having that experience. That experience was pretty much worthless at that point.
Let's talk about how you got that role, though. You say you were doing your thesis for your master's and you contacted someone, and that piece, that email, whatever it was, that kind of did it all for you, really. How important do you think it is to be proactive and contacting people like that when you're interested in a role?
Oh, it's massively. I mean, I'll give a lot of credit to, I get a lot of people on LinkedIn, especially who message, and I think the biggest, for anyone who's listening, who's at that point where they're trying to break in, or they just want to get some exposure. It is all about exposure. It's all about, you can do the best bit of work, you can have the best bit of experience in the world, but if nobody knows about it, it has zero value. You are going to get told no a lot. You're going to get you are going to have a lot of people who just ignore you. I think the best way to avoid that, and there is no guarantee on this, right? There's no golden bullet that you do this and you will get a job at this company. A lot of it is luck, but it's about being in the right position at the right time and just hoping that you get a bit of luck, because you may not get that for a few years. I had multiple conversations with I had a couple of conversations with like Formula 2 team bosses, for example, and I had a conversation with someone quite high up at MotoGP, and all of them effectively said the exact same thing, which was that effectively, look, kid, you're great, but also we're not interested.
Yeah.
And actually, it was F1 then that kind of were like, yeah, look, like you've got a lot of, you're showing that you've got a lot of gumph about you. You're showing that you're proactive. We're not going to give you any money. And for context, my first job at F1, I was paid less than I'd have been paid, pretty much anywhere else. I was on really low money. Central London, I was losing £1,000 a month on trains, and living just basically being able to go to work. But for me, it was kind of like, I had that was my opportunity then. It was like, I have to take this, I have to go for it, even if it puts me in financial stress. I have to give it a go at least. And I got, that's where I kind of got a double dose of luck, where COVID for me actually came at the perfect time, because I was in long enough to get furlough, and then it meant I had 6 months to save money up, so that then when COVID ended and we went back to the office, I could afford to go in the office, because the pay didn't increase, but the requirement to travel and to go in the office did. I got lucky, but I think the main thing for people is you have to offer value, right? So you can't just email someone or message them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm so and so, I'm really interested in motorsport, I would love to talk to you about getting a job. I think that's when I get messages like that, it's always kind of like, I always kind of sit there and think, well, I'm busy. What's the value to me? Whereas I get a few, and I've had a few, I've mentored a few guys and girls who've kind of come through, who, when they reach out, it's more about they show the value that they offer. They kind of, and it's not percent of them offering me work, like giving me work, or if it's not things like that. What it is the way they message is much more, I've done this piece of work, can we have a chat about it? Or, I'm doing this at the moment, what do you think my next step should be? Rather than just purely give me a job. And it's a very slight difference, but I think it's really important, because once you start getting contacts in the industry, doors open. It's a very, very small industry. There are probably about 10,000 people in the world who work in motorsport, actively, for more than 6 months. So once you become known in that space, once you become known in the industry, it's actually fairly easy to stay in the industry. But getting in is hard. It is, you are going to have to batter the door down, and just hope that it creaks a little, just enough for you to get in. There is also an aspect to this, I think, that is really overlooked, which is that you don't have to directly go into your dream job, right? I think, especially when you're younger, I think there's a feeling and an idea that I want to work for F1, brilliant, but F1 wants someone who's got loads of experience, or I want to work for McLaren or Red Bull or Mercedes, great, but actually those companies work with hundreds of suppliers. So sometimes the best way of getting known in the industry is actually look at what suppliers they're working with. What partners do they have? Let's say you want to get into partnerships. What partners do Mercedes have? Right. Look at those partners. Do they have any jobs that are available that have any contact with the motorsport side? Because if you get that job, the people at Mercedes are going to know you. They're going to learn to know you. They're going to learn to know your work. They're going to learn to know that you're good at what you do. You can then go in sideways and go in that way. It isn't just a case of it's either motorsport or nothing. I know so many people at Formula E who their jobs before Formula E were nothing to do with motorsport. But what they did do is they got them noticed, and they got them really good exposure, and they then learned how to do the job to a really high level before they kind of got thrown into motorsport. Because for me, those 2 years at F1, while they were great, it's great to say that you've been at F1. It's great to say that you've been to, I topically at Danny Rick, like, I saw Danny Rick's last race win when he was at Monza, for McLaren. Like I, got to see Lewis and Max doing what they were doing in 2019, in 2021. I got to see that in Jeddah. I got to see that in Abu Dhabi. Like there's a lot of things I got to see because of F1. But actually, I didn't get the most out of that job because it was too early in my career. I basically got thrown into it, did a decent job, but it was never going to be a long-term role because, I had to actually learn to do the job before I probably needed to be 5 years down the line for that role.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you have any regret for taking that on so early?
No, absolutely not. I think there's I think you get a finite number of chances or like breaks in your life. I think you're never guaranteed you're never guaranteed that you're going to get another big kind of dose of luck. So for me, it was I regret that I wasn't able to, I think if COVID hadn't come around, yes, financially I'd have been in a lot of trouble, but I think, I would then have been in the office more. I'd have been able to learn from people. What I would say though is that because of the situation at F1 and because, realistically I was effectively hanging in there by my fingernails the whole time and was constantly having to prove my value, that then led me to go to FE, which for me was a much, that's where I've learned to do that, my craft. That's where I've learned how to, the role that I do now and how to basically become the person that I am. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without Formula One. That kind of it breaks the glass ceiling of this is an impossible job to get into. And once you've been in that position, you can then take any challenge that gets offered to you, and you kind of know you learn how to adapt because it is all about it's all about adaptability. It's all about learning how, there's no such thing as just I'm a partnerships manager, so I manage partners, because a partnerships manager for FE, for example, yes, they manage the partners, but they're also managing the activations. They're also managing the customer relations. They're managing all this other stuff that you don't think of when you think of those roles. So it teaches you how to kind of learn on your feet more than anything, which is really important.
Now, that role you did have at Formula One,
Yeah.
research and insights analyst, what exactly did that entail? What was your day like? What was a day in the life for you?
Honestly, it's one of those jobs that I think you kind of say to someone, what do you want to do in motorsport? And it's not really the job that anyone would ever say, right? I don't think anyone, if you want to be an analyst, you want to be a race analyst or a race strategist, or, you want to be something a bit cooler. What we were generally doing was, it was predominantly fan data, TV data, media. It was effectively the stuff that people don't think about when you don't think about it as a fan, but is incredibly important to the company because, you use TV data to sell the company to partners. You use it to sell to media rights holders. So everything we were doing was effectively creating we were creating the data and the storylines that meant that the company could succeed. So for me, it was predominantly about fan data. So it was mainly on-site and digital fan kind of interactions. So how fans interacted with sport, what they liked, what they disliked, understanding what was working and what wasn't. And for me, that was kind of where I realized that actually, for me, that was never a job that I wanted to do for the rest of my life, that position. In motorsport, yes, not that position. But for me, it was an important position because it meant that I was in the industry. And look, you can always change jobs. You can always change your speciality and your focus. It's where you're doing it and where you're doing the work that I think is the most important. So for me, it was like, this is going to be a couple of years. This is going to be focused on fan data. It's going to be focused on the fans. And what it did allow me to do is understand what fans like and what they dislike and what people like and dislike. And that actually then became incredibly useful for what I then went on to do at FE.
I'm curious, as a fan of motorsport yourself, was it kind of eye-opening seeing what other fans think. Did you kind of be like, yeah, I knew that already. I feel that way. Was there ever any of that?
There was a little bit, yeah. I think
I
you,
could have told you that for free. I didn't need to do this work.
yeah, it's weird because you a lot of the time, yes, but a lot of the time, no, and a surprisingly high amount of the time, things would come out and you just kind of sit there and go, really? Like, is that the way you kind of think about it? What you do realize is that there is a incredibly, as a European motorsport fan, you you have a very specific view of motorsport, right? I think Europeans have a we've grown up, as I said at the beginning, we've grown up with motorsport, we've grown up with Formula One, so we've grown up with this idea of like Spa on a drizzly day, kind of that's motorsport. If you ask an American what motorsport is, they say the Indy 500 or the Daytona, NASCAR, or they say like, just general stock car racing, all these massive ovals. But actually, if you ask someone from the Middle East what motor racing is, for them it's the music and the kind of overarching just day experience and kind of everything else that's around it. If you are, let's say, I don't know, an Asian motorsport fan, it's much more around supporting a driver or a specific team. So, like, you see that a lot in Japan with it's a Japanese driver. It's like everybody's supporting the Japanese driver, and it's all very polite, but it's also very kind of like if the Japanese driver doesn't win, it's fine because they're there. They respect everyone. They're respecting all of the drivers and they respect the craft more. Whereas in Europe, it's much more kind of tribal and it's a bit more, we love Max, we hate Max. There's a lot more of that. So from a European perspective, absolutely what you would expect, right? Your European fans are pretty much exactly what if you think about what a traditional fan is, that's what they are. But actually, when you go further afield, it changes completely. And that's something that we try to look at as much as possible because it's really expensive to put a race on. It's really expensive to put an event that has 100,000 people on. So anything we can do to, firstly make people come back because that's the main thing, right? We want people coming back every year. We want people to have a great time and immediately go, right, when's the next race? When can I get there again? Because it means you haven't got to market as much. You don't have to go out to the market and try and convince people to come because you've already convinced them. So trying to use that data as much as possible where we could, but then also identifying potential kind of easy wins. So something I did at F1, which actually ironically came from Formula E, that I kind of saw and suggested we should use was a driver cam, which was the camera that was on the helmets that was inside the helmets for a few years. That actually was pioneered by Formula E before I worked for Formula E, and we kind of were like, that's a really good idea. Let's use it. And you see that kind of picking and choosing from every single motorsport and every single sport does something similar, where you will take best practice from a different championship or a different organization and use it in your own organization. You have to be careful because sometimes it doesn't work, but I think we had a pretty good hit rate. Sometimes there were some duds, but we had a pretty good hit rate.
Now let's talk about that transition over from your job in Formula One to Formula
Yeah.
E, where you were just working, specialising in events. Can
Yes.
you talk us through your role there? What exactly were you doing?
Yeah, so I got offered the chance to move over to Formula E at the end of 2021. I'd done 2 seasons at F1. As I said, I think from a growth perspective and from a kind of career perspective, I felt like I needed to be somewhere that I had more chance to have an impact because I think Formula One, there's a huge difference between the two. Formula One has been around for 70 years, is very set in stone in what they do. So any changes you make come very slowly and they are very deliberate. Whereas Formula E at the time was only 7 years old. Had just come off of a very kind of difficult couple of years with COVID. Like Formula E really struggled through COVID because they had so much momentum going up to season 5, and then kind of couldn't have people in the stands, and the media product wasn't quite strong enough to keep the fans in the same way that Formula One was. So when I got offered that opportunity to move over, I kind of it was under the caveat that effectively I would be in charge of all of our event work around our event strategy, our event effectively deciding and designing what our events looked like. So my first, the first 2 years I was at FE was predominantly working extremely closely with the event directors, with the event experience director, with senior stakeholders in the company, kind of up to C-suite level, where we went from having no idea who the fans were. When I first joined FE, they had no idea who was going to their races. They had no idea who was spending money, why they were attending, what they wanted. And by the end of those 2 years, we were at a position where we had specific market breakdowns for every single race. We knew exactly who was attending, who they were attending with, when they arrived, when they left. Like you literally we got down to such granular data with that. And for me, it was always a case of that was always leading into the role that I ended up doing this season, which was as an event experience manager. So for context, we have a group of event experience managers at Formula E. So generally would do 2 races per year as a lead, and then you'd have the rest of the teams in a support function. For me, as a pure event experience manager, we were focused predominantly on the fan villages. So we're focused on the overarching event experience. We're focused on end to end. So how the customer gets there, making sure they get in and out of the venue safely and easily, making sure that security is all there, making sure that F&B's there, making sure that there are things to do in the fan zone between track action, because one of the limitations of FE is there isn't a support series. So it's not like a Formula One where you can sit in the grandstand for 6 hours and you're watching F2, F3, Porsche Super Cup while the Formula One cars are in the garage. FE doesn't have that. It's free practice in the morning, qualifying around lunchtime, and then the race 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you do have these gaps of 2 or 3 hours where actually you need to fill those gaps. So the way we did that was by we put a massive emphasis on the live event experience. So the music, the atmosphere, the activations that were happening. So we would have multiple music acts on throughout the day, and usually tailor them towards what event and what location we were in. We'd have usually most of our partners activating. All of our partners would activate across the season, but to varying degrees. That would be things like simulators. It'd be like immersive experiences. A great example was Berlin, and probably the best example of an activation that we've done was Berlin this year, where we, from the work that I'd done in the previous seasons, we'd identified that Berlin effectively had this massively intense motorsport kind of crowd, where about a quarter of the people who came constantly were like, I would spend more money to get more things. I want to see more. I want to do more. So we looked at operating a product where people bought a ticket, but then anyone who had a ticket, whether it was £25 kind of just fan village ticket, all the way up to a category A, 99, €100 ticket, got the option to purchase effectively what we call a pole position pass, which was you got guaranteed access to the autograph session. You got guaranteed kind of you got some F&B vouchers. You got guaranteed early access to the site. But also what you got was you got this specialized area in front of the podium where we had a capacity of, I think it was 100 people, and we had people with ADA difficulties, like who were in wheelchairs, and we had quite a lot of people with autism and neurodivergency who were given who bought those tickets, and they're there and they're kind of like 2 meters away from the race winner who's spraying champagne on them, and they're like high-fiving them and having an amazing time, and they've paid £100 for that, and they kind of leave and they're all beaming and smiling and having an amazing time, when F1 are charging £500 for a general admission ticket. So that was kind of where we differentiated, and we tried really hard to make that as good an experience as possible. And for me, that was the kind of, that's probably one of the best working experiences I've had, and feelings I've had is you've had a product from inception to execution, and people are leaving and they're kind of like, I can't believe that was only €100. That was incredible. I've never been that close to drivers. And I think that's something that at FE we did really well, was giving that access to drivers, giving that access to, look, F1 is great, but the drivers you're going to see, if you're in the grandstand at Silverstone, you're probably 100 meters from a driver. that's probably the closest you're going to get to them. You might get close to them if their car heads towards you at pace. But
I'm not sure that's what
genuinely,
they're wanting though.
but that's probably not what you want. Yeah. So for us, that was kind of the big thing was, right, we've got these drivers who are assets and we're underutilizing that. Let's find a way of getting people closer. We had in Portland this year, we had a Grandstand Plus project, which was a little bit smaller. It was a little bit less, it wasn't quite as close to the action as that. But what it was a specific area where, they were on the grandstand on top of a hill where they got an amazing view of the track. They had their own like music, they had their own food and drink, they had their own like area, and just little things you can do like that to make people feel special. That goes a really long way, and it doesn't always have to cost more money. You can sometimes find things that you've already, if you've already got capacity, if you've already got the assets and everything already in place, actually you can provide that extra value for people without any real downside to you as a company or as an organization.
I have to give you credit as well as the team you were working with, because Formula E is the only races I've ever been to. I've been to the London E-Prix for the last 3 years now. And everything you're saying is so true. I've spoken about it on podcasts before. It's the access to the drivers. I've never met so many people on a weekend in my life. I even met this year, I met David Hay and I met Liam Hemsworth, and I was freaking out at that. And it's just the access you have to the track, being able to walk through the pit lane, going on the track for the podium. You don't really get that in many other categories. In Formula One, you're never going to have access like that, being able to run straight from the grandstand, get on the track, run across. I even have tear-offs that I got from the track that drivers have just thrown off. And it is those memories that I love about motorsport. I've never been to any other race, and I almost don't want to, because Formula E was that good for me and that much of an experience. And I just love sitting here and listening to you talk about all of the way you
That's
make those decisions.
that's great to hear, because I know Molly Simpson, who is the lead on London. She'll love to hear that, because we as a team, for context, there are three areas within the team. So there's kind of like the workforce focus, who are looking after support staff, which, by the way, is probably one of the most important jobs in the paddock, because getting 200 volunteers to onto site, getting them all in the right position, getting them all briefed, making sure that they're friendly, that they're super positive, and that they're knowledgeable, that's hard. And those guys do an incredible job. And then we've got other people like our ceremonies team, where who look after kind of the podium and the live music. For example, like the Craig David pre-race show that we had on the final day, getting a 30-piece orchestra on the podium just before the race, and then having Craig David sing, all of that stuff takes a huge amount of effort. And the whole point of the team was to effectively create those experiences, and it's to create those memories. For me, I've been to, I have a season ticket holder at a football club. I go to multiple race race events a year. I go to so many different events, and there are so many of them I would not be able to tell you anything from. I wouldn't be able to, I have no memory of what exactly happened or what was available. So for me, if we can create, in whichever team I'm in or whatever company I'm in, if we can create those memories and make it so that people go, bloody hell, that was incredible, or I didn't expect it to be that good, or oh wow, did you see, we just saw so and so, or I met I met this person, or I saw this person doing whatever. That's a huge positive for me, and that's why I fell in love with events, and that's why I fell in love with the kind of operational delivery and building. Because using Berlin again as an example, you turn up 2 weeks before the race, and it is literally just a solid tarmac concrete apron. It's effectively an old runway and taxiway for an airport. There is nothing there. It's just a flat concrete. It's almost like you kind of, if you think about when you used to play like Roller Coaster Tycoon or something, it's just a flat grass plain. It's a bit like that. You basically have a blank canvas, and it's up to you to decide what goes in, where things go, what you're doing, what are you offering people, and thinking about it almost as a customer journey. So people are coming in here, what are they seeing when what's that wow moment when they first come in? From London, you'll obviously have we've got the tunnel when you kind of get your tickets scanned. you go through the tunnel into the indoor fan village. We changed a lot from season 8 to season 9, so 2022 to 23, where we in 2022 we had the stage in the middle of the fan village, and because we thought, oh, it's a focal point. Actually, what we figured was that if you have the stage at the far end of the XL, as people are walking in, it kind of creates a focal effect where everyone will filter through down that way. And it means that people, firstly, the foot traffic spreads out a little bit more, but also people kind of know where to go. People go, oh, that's where the stage is, rather than looking for it. And especially when it's really busy, because the XL does get really busy, making sure that people actually feel safe and feel welcome. And, a great example of that was after season 9, so after 2023 London, we had a few complaints where people who basically they had kids with autism, or they had guests with autism, or who were kind of sensitive to loud noises, or felt a little bit overwhelmed effectively. And something that we wanted to do was make sure that they felt safe, they felt welcome, because a big advantage of Formula E compared to traditional motorsport is this is a bit of a weird one, because it's always been seen as a disadvantage, and that's a lack of noise.
Yeah.
I think if you're a detractor of Formula E, the first thing you say is, oh, they sound like dishwashers, or they sound like, it's always that kind of, that noise aspect is always thrown around as a negative. We realized that actually it is a negative if you're a traditional motorsport fan. And we're probably we're never going to appeal to a NASCAR fan. It's just not going to happen. There's no point in trying. But what we do appeal to, and who we do appeal to, are families. We appeal to groups of people who wouldn't traditionally be able to get to a motorsport event, because they've got young kids, because they've got people with ADA needs, with people they've got people who don't want to feel overwhelmed. So actually, what we did was we were like, right, come to Formula E. The cars aren't massively loud, and you'll have a great time. But we're going to offer you quiet rooms. We're going to offer you spaces that you can go to if you need to calm, you need to get away from it for 10 minutes. And we marketed that. We didn't charge any extra for it. It was just basically, we've got a capacity in the XL to do that. Let's do it. And that came back really positive and really well received. We, as a championship, wanted to make sure that everybody felt welcome and safe and secure. And there was no reason for someone who's in a wheelchair not to have as good a time at a motorsport event as someone who isn't. Silverstone is a fantastic venue. Brands Hatch is a fantastic venue. Spa's a fantastic venue. But they are limiting from an ADA perspective. They're limiting from that side of it. And while the total number of people who have those needs is obviously lower than people who don't, there's no reason why you can't make sure that those people have just as good a time. So that was a big focus towards the second half of last year, and kind of just tweaking the bits of what we were offering, while making sure that we were really nailing that kind of, this is for everyone, the sport is for everyone. And I'll give credit to Formula E, they've done really well on that, and they are continuing to do well with it. They've got a female test coming up before the new season. Like, they are pushing hard on that, which is great to see, because there's no real reason why that can't be the case. I think we have pretty good gender parity at FE as well from the staff. It was probably, I think it was about 40, 48, 52 male to female. Like, it was really, really even. You've got senior females in leadership roles. You've got, people who are some of the most respected people in the company, who are the least traditional motorsport people you could ever imagine. And it doesn't matter, because the whole championship is designed and is built around getting fans as close to the action as possible, and offering something that is a bit different. Because before I started at FE, and kind of hung over into when I first started, there was this idea that Formula E needed to compete directly against Formula One, and this was not going to happen, not on a like-for-like basis, because, as I said, most European Formula One fans are very set in their ways, and they like what they like. I'm one of them. I'm much more of a traditional Formula One fan than I am a Formula E fan. So it was a case of, why are we spending this money to try and convince people who are never going to become fans? Let's go and make our own events. Let's decide that, let's make our events what we want them to be. Let's make the championship what we want it to be. And I feel like that's been really successful. I do think there's a long way to go. I think there's the cars are now reaching a point where they're getting close to parity with like with top level traditionally aspirated cars, but there is still a way to go in terms of the kind of a Formula E race is half the distance of a Formula One race, for example. So there are still things that can be improved, but considering that the championship is only 10 years old, you look at Formula One in the 60s when it was 10 years old, and they are leaps and bounds ahead of where most people thought they would be at this time. So it is good to see.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. You're talking about how Formula E was able to kind of appeal to different audiences, people who maybe struggle with loud noises, people who have accessibility issues. How difficult is it when you're thinking of an event, you're trying to plan everything out, to kind of put that hat on and think like someone who is struggling with these issues?
It's a really good point, because it is extremely hard as an able-bodied man to understand or to appreciate realistically how difficult it can be for someone who's maybe not as able-bodied, or who has specific needs, or like I've never been in that situation where I've been in a wheelchair. So for me, how am I able to decide what is needed? And that's where, firstly, it's where roundtabling comes in, but it's also where you bring in people who actually know what it's like. You get an expert opinion, you get a second opinion, you run things through people. So you don't just work in a chamber, and you don't just work in a vertical, and this is what I do and this is all I do. What you do is you decide, you design what you think is going to be acceptable, you design what you think is going to be appropriate, and then you run it past people who actually have those experiences, and you give them a chance to feed into it, and you are open about that, because there is nothing worse for an event than having one person who's in complete control and has doesn't allow any feed in from all sides, right? It's a very collaborative effort. Events are so complicated, and it doesn't matter what size event it's for, whether it's for 200 people or 20,000 or 200,000. The core principles are all the same. You just scale it up and down, and you need to make sure that you have a second opinion, because as I'm sure sometimes you'll think of something, or you'll have this is a great idea, and then you tell someone and they go, what the hell are you thinking? Like, that makes no, and sometimes you just need that reality check. A great example with London this year, and I'm using London because obviously you've been there, so you have a bit more of an idea of what I'm talking about. Our track flooding, you mentioned that before. On the Saturday, we used the same access route for our kind of pole position guests and for our general guests, and we just kind of had the pole position guests in the front of basically the mass of people. But what ended up happening was that actually there were still lots of super avid fans who wanted to get to the podium ceremony, who then decided they were going to sprint past everyone who had the premium experience tickets. And that wasn't something that we identified beforehand, because it was something we hadn't done the track flooding in that way before. But we then, we kind of sat down, had a bit of a think about it on Saturday night, and we were working till 11:30 midnight on Saturday night to try and fix it. And then what we ended up doing was, we had the accessibility platform in the middle of the main straight, right in front of the podium. So it was like, right, well, we'll get the accessibility guests down. As soon as the race finishes, they go down, they get right at the front of the queue there, and they're accessing through the center of the pit lane. And then our pole position guests kind of go behind them, and we managed the flow of traffic much greater. So it didn't mean that we didn't let everyone on the track at the end of the race. What it meant is those people who firstly were less mobile, and secondly had paid for a better experience, were able to be right in the middle of the track flooding, right underneath the podium. And the people who hadn't bought those weren't penalised. They were still able to come in the way they'd been able to come in on the Saturday. But what it meant is it meant that we had a slightly better user experience. And we only learn that by doing it and making those mistakes. Sometimes you are learning on the job. Sometimes as a company, especially, look at Formula One with Las Vegas last year. They learned so many things about that Formula E have been doing for 10 years. But Formula E made those mistakes 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Formula One this year in Vegas will not make the same mistakes as they did last year because they'll learn as a championship. And sometimes you just need to make those mistakes as a company. And the issue is only then becomes if you then don't learn from it and you make the same mistakes again and again. So it's all about continuous learning. It's always about, okay, we did a good job, but what can we do better? Give yourself a pat on the back because you did well, but actually, time to kind of knuckle down and go from there and see where we want to go.
Would you describe your job role, your position, as a high pressure job?
I think it's absolutely, yeah, I think it's massively high pressured. I think there are two types of pressure you get on a race weekend. There is a kind of long term pressure where if you are working on a product, you're working on an event, it's your baby, right? You have ownership over that. So it's incredibly difficult you kind of, especially as you get towards the last few weeks where things become very real. And anyone who's planned a wedding will know this, that it becomes incredibly real, and you then start to analyze and microanalyze every little thing. And that's actually quite bad, for you to do, because you're then wasting time. You're spending time that should be spent on operationally delivering the event, on worrying about things that actually nobody's going to notice, because you could be sat there and go, oh no, the color of that banner isn't exactly what I wanted. If I'm a fan, I don't care about that. I have no interest in that at all. But because you've kind of created something from scratch, you have ownership of it and you analyze absolutely everything. It's human nature. You want it to be perfect. Nothing is ever going to be perfect. Some of the best events we've ever had have had issues that the fans didn't know about, but we dealt with it on the day. And that's where the second kind of pressure comes in, which is real world pressure, which is, I've got a mum and a dad here with a screaming child because the child's fallen down the stairs and has cut their knee open. Or I've got, a tuk-tuk on the track in India because the policeman wasn't looking in or didn't know where to go. Or I've got a bus that's turned, there are all these things. And there are certain markets that are much higher pressure than others. I think India is a great example where that's a huge achievement getting, that was last year. For anyone who doesn't know, we had a Hyderabad Prix in 2023. That was a slog. That was a big challenge, but we did it. We were all slightly broken at the end of the week, but we did it. Sao Paulo this year, and it's probably the most acute example I can give you, is we were a little bit delayed in our delivery because we had a few issues with suppliers, but we also we had an injury in our team, which meant we were a man down throughout the week. So kind of the capacity of the team reduced, but the scope didn't change. And we were kind of in the middle of a heat wave in Sao Paulo. It was about 37, 38 degrees Celsius, and we got to about 8 p.m. the night before the race and realized that there were no, we have hydration stations in Formula E, which is effectively free water stations. We realized that we didn't have all the cups. We had 37,000 eco cups that hadn't been put out because they'd just been overlooked, because we'd obviously been worried about the big stuff. But the problem with that is that if you're 37, 38 degrees Celsius and no one can drink any water, you're going to have 30,000 dehydrated and incredibly angry and potentially quite ill people on site. So me and my director stayed up till 3 a.m. in the morning on a golf buggy and basically hand delivered 37,000 eco cups all around the site. We left site at 3 a.m. in the morning, and then we're back on site at 5 a.m. the next morning to get for the race. So we literally went back to the hotel, had a shower, quick kind of hour nap, and then back on site. By 4 o'clock the following day, we were, the race happened. We did the podium, we did all that, and then it was just like you just crash because you're exhausted. But sometimes there is that pressure that you just have to get the job done, and sometimes you're not going to have a great time. You're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to, you're going to think, why the hell am I doing this? But actually, then when you kind of look at the stands and you've got 30,000 people, you've got kids, you've got families, you've got motorsport fans, and they're all having an amazing time. Those people have no idea what was going on the night before. And it doesn't matter because they've had a good time. They've paid the money. They will want to come back and they will be sat there thinking, wow, this is an amazing event. If we hadn't have spent those 4 or 5 hours doing that, most of those people would have had a terrible day. And that's like a real world example of something that's might seem really small, but actually, it's only cups. Well, people can buy the drinks, but yeah, they can buy their drinks, but actually getting given something for free and getting given like just a bit, access to clean drinking water, for example, is such a basic thing.
Yeah.
And in some markets, it's really hard to get right. And you do kind of walk away from that going, okay, that was hard, but that was worth it. And for me, that's where the massive job satisfaction comes in, where you kind of sat there and thinking, we did good this week. We did really well. You then caveat that with Tokyo, which was 2 weeks later, where the entire fan village was built by Wednesday, and we just basically coasted into the week because the Japanese were so organized and efficient that it just got done.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like there's one extreme to the other, and most events kind of fit in the middle somewhere, but you do sometimes get ones that are incredibly difficult, and you do sometimes get ones that are incredibly easy, or simple is probably a better word. I don't think there's no such thing as an easy event. I think, but some are much more predictable and simple than others.
Talking about job satisfaction, then, what is your proudest accomplishment, your proudest achievement so far?
It's a very good question. So I think I'm actually going to say Jakarta. I think Jakarta is probably, so for anyone who doesn't know, obviously Jakarta in Indonesia, massive city, like 30 million people, zero motorsport knowledge. Like there's literally no understanding of motorsport apart from a bit of motorbikes. That's about it. Season 8, we went to Jakarta for the first time. Really difficult build, really difficult event to put on, kind of 45 degrees Celsius, 95% humidity. Like never seen people sweating, including myself, as much, like drenched as soon as you step outside. Massive thunderstorms. We got the event on. The event took place, but we kind of came away from that thinking that was like, we can't be doing that again. That, like, we need to change things. We need to improve things. So during the off season, spent a huge amount of time with the event director for Jakarta at the time, Gemma, Sarah, and we basically sat down and was like, right, what are the priorities? What do we need to do? What is it we need to achieve? Worked very hard on delivering that. Worked very hard with the local team to kind of educate them and get them ready pre-delivery. To the point then when we had season 9, and we kind of went back to Jakarta, the temperature was still the same, weather was still the same, but the build and the venue was so much better. And we, rather than having people running around like headless chickens just to get things done, actually we kind of, I'm not going to say coasted because we didn't. It was still hard, but it wasn't a 1 a.m. in the morning finish every day for a week. It was very much a case of get to Thursday night and it was like, okay, we're in a good position here, we're in a good place. Just like the year-on-year transition for that was so difficult. That's probably the biggest from a corporate perspective, but I think from a personal perspective, it has got to be the Sao Paulo. It's got to be the Sao Paulo kind of story I've just told you, because that is kind of what it is to be in events. That's kind of what it is to be an operational member of a team. It's the unseen bits that most people don't see. It's the bits that most people who are at the event will never know happened. But that if that didn't get done properly, there could have been a serious incident, or there could have been a real issue. There are so many things that event staff do, and regardless of whether it's motorsport, whether it's football, whether it's tennis or marathons or whatever, there are so many things that go on behind the scenes that people don't realize and don't see that make a huge difference. And there will probably, there are going to be stories like that all over the place where people have done, put extra hours in, and it's directly related to an improved result. It's quite rare you get that. It's quite rare that you can firsthand see the effect of the work that you've had. And for me, that's the main benefit of working in events, is like, if you've done a good job, you will see that you've done a good job. You'll know that you've done a good job because it'll be obvious. If you've done a bad job, if you've messed up, every single person who bought the ticket is going to let you know it. And that's a scary place when that happens, because it does happen, and it's there's no running. You have to kind of sit there and stand up for it.
I don't think I could physically work in a job that is so high pressure. I don't think I can hold that weight. You know, the fan experience, the weight of that on my shoulders. I don't think I could do it. Hats off to you. And with that Formula E chapter coming to an end now, what's next for you? What do you want to do? What is the dream?
So for me, it's continuing to kind of evolve those skills. So I want to make sure that the role that I'm doing is it's fan journey, but it's elevating something that already exists to a greater level, right? So I'm in a position now where I can take a bit of time to kind of choose where I want to go, and wherever it is that I go, I think is going to be an entity that has been around for a while, but there is scope to improve. So for me, it's all about identifying, okay, this company, I've identified an issue here. I've identified something that can be done differently. I've identified where we go from here, but it's about implementing it and bringing the best bits of the culture from Formula E, the best bits of the culture from Formula One, and all those learnings, and putting them into something new. Because for me, I want to stay. I'm very much want to stay in motorsport. Very much want to stay in elite sport in general. So whether that's in motorsport, whether that's in something else, but for me, it's very much I want to see fans and I want to see people having a great time because of something that I've done. I think there is a huge need at the moment. There's a big disparity between the best events and the worst events, where you have some championships and organizations who make incredible events. You look at America, you look at the NFL, you look at what they're doing with the Super Bowl, you look at the way that they engage with their fans, you look at a lot of Premier League teams and clubs, the way they engage with their fans, and then you compare that to the way that other companies engage or don't engage, and just kind of you buy a ticket, turn up, watch it, and go home. That old-fashioned, and it is old-fashioned, that viewpoint of Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock kickoff, I'm going to go for an hour, I'm going to go turn up to the grounds 2:15, watch my team play, and then go home. That does still exist, but a lot of those fans go to the pub before the game or after the game. So you're not telling me that there's not an interest there to have that community aspect and to have that experience for a longer time. It's just how you get it across to people. It's about how you offer it to people, and you don't offer it as you must do this, but you offer it as an available option. It's something that you want or people want to do, and if they want to do it and have a good time, they'll continue to do it, and it can build that way. It's events. It's incredibly important to make sure people know that they have choice. If you want to sit in the grandstand and just watch cars going around the track, that's what I would do. As if I was a fan, if I had bought a ticket for the race, I'd probably just watch the racing. I wouldn't, when I go to Silverstone, I don't really go to the fan zone. It's probably a slightly hypocritical thing to say, but I don't. Because I'm there to watch the racing. But I do go through the fan zone on a Friday and kind of have a look around and see what's on offer. But Saturday, Sunday, I'm not interested, because I'm interested in the racing. But there are a huge amount of people who, especially if they've got young kids, who, for them, that's that's where the memories come in. If you've got a little kid on a simulator who's driving a car around the track, they may remember that more than the actual race itself. I have memories from when I was a kid of like flight simulators at an air show. I don't remember the air show going on, but I remember like trying to land a plane on a runway. So it's about offering experiences for all ages and all interests, and kind of whatever I do and wherever I end up, that's what I want to do, and that's where I want to be.
To wrap things up then, Peter, what advice would you give to those who are wanting to go into like running motorsport events?
I think patience. Patience is really important. I think everybody thinks they're an expert until they do it, right? I think there is an aspect of this which is just kind of, you have to have a thick skin. You have to be willing to take things on the chin and accept that sometimes things aren't going to go your way, and sometimes things aren't going to be exactly what you wanted. And not to take it personally, because you can do the single greatest bit of work you've ever done and put countless hours in and sweat and blood and guts and tears and all this kind of stuff, and someone could turn up and go, oh well, I don't like this, and there's nothing you can do. All you can focus on is what you think is the most important thing for the people who are there, and making sure that they have the likeliest time or likeliest good time that you can have. We want people to, most people go home happy. You've done your job. If everyone gets there, has a good time, and gets home safe, you've done your job. Focus on the essentials. You're focusing on safety. You're focusing on the kind of, if I don't know if you've ever heard of a hierarchy of needs, but it's all about, if you nail the basics, it's really hard for people to have a bad time. If you mess up the basics, no matter how good the product is, no matter how good anything else is, all they're going to remember is the basic bits that weren't taken care of. If people have to walk 5 miles to get to site, their last memory of the event is going to be the walk back at the end of the day. If the food options are terrible, no one's going to, they're not going to be remembering how good, the race was, how good the event was. They're going to be going, oh, the food was terrible, wasn't it? Like, I only had hot dogs and that was it. Like, sometimes people get caught up with the flashy aspects and get caught up with the, oh, I can change the world, I can do this, I can do that, I can do all this amazing stuff, when actually the basics are, they're there for a reason. They are the foundational aspects of everything you do, and you have to hit those on the head. And once you've hit those on the head, and once you've nailed those and they're where you want them to be, that's when you then kind of take a step back and go, right, this is what we've got left. We've got, I don't know, 2 months left we've got 2 months and £100,000 left. What can we do? Right. And that's kind of, but you have to hit those basic bits first and make sure that the event happens firstly and that it's safe. Everything else stems from that, and everything else comes from that. And just be patient. You might not get, you probably won't get offered something the first job you go for. I'm in processes at the moment as of recording. Obviously, this may change by the time this goes out, but it's all about patience. It's all about proving your worth and showing to people that you want to become an asset. You don't want to become a liability, and sometimes people won't respect that. Sometimes people won't think you're an asset, and that can be hard to take. But there will be a company out there that does, and there will be, and that company will be the right fit. Don't just jump into a job for the sake of jumping into a job. Don't just, it can be really tempting, especially if you're at an early career stage, to just take the first job that you get offered. If you can afford, like, sometimes you can't afford not to say no. I get that. But if you can afford to say no, and you can afford to be patient, and you can afford to get experience in the right areas, it is worth it. I didn't start working for F1 until I was 25. I was quite late getting into the industry from not in terms of like an age, but from I didn't do my master's degree till I was in my early to late 20s. Like most people do it when they're 21, 22. I was a few years behind. That didn't affect my ability to get in. All it meant was that I kind of learned to be a bit more patient and to not expect everything to happen immediately, and to just listen to the people who've been there and listen to the people who have experience, who made the mistakes. Use their mistake or learn from their mistakes before you make the same mistakes, and build on their experience, and you'll be in a great position. And firstly, and lastly, just go for it. Like, don't be afraid to apply for stuff. Don't be afraid to, there are so many volunteering opportunities. There are so many like freelance opportunities in motorsport. London's a great example where we have Formula E have 200 volunteers usually, like, per race. And yes, you're not getting paid for it, but for that exact experience. But there are people in Formula E now who are in senior manager and director level roles who started their experience as volunteers at races. There are some people who've literally gone from volunteer to coordinator to manager to senior manager to director. Like, it does happen. the only way it happens is if you're in the right position in the right place. You have to be in those positions and you have to be putting yourself out there more than just a few LinkedIn messages and more than just a few casual, hey, I'm interested in motorsport, can we have a chat? It's actually, proving that you are, you know, a cut above the vast number of people who want to get into sport in general, because it's thousands of people.
Yeah.
You're competing against thousands of people, but the percentage you actually reach out to people is very low. Don't be afraid of no. Don't be scared. Don't be scared of being told no, because you're gonna get told no a lot. And
Yeah.
once you get over that, and once you kind of park the ego and park I didn't, the first time I was transitioning into the event experience role, I applied for the role internally to change across. I didn't get the role initially because there was a senior manager and then it just so happened that 3 weeks later someone that became available, there was another availability came up, and I got offered the job immediately. I didn't even have to interview for it again because I came second in that process. And the person who got the job is still at FE, and she's an incredible event experience manager. She's a very good friend, but I could quite easily have that not got in that process and gone, oh well, I've had my time before me, now I'm done. So you just sometimes have to be patient and just kind of wait for opportunities to come about, but make sure you're in the right position for them, because if you're not, doesn't matter how good your CV is, it doesn't matter how good you are as a person and professionally, you're not going to get seen.
Mhm. Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your career so far. We wish you all the best for the future, and we hope to see you making our fan experience the best it can be. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll
But
be back soon with another career talk. Thank you all for watching.